All right, ladies and gentlemen, it is with great pleasure I introduce you to the magician from Riga, none other than the legendary world champion, Mikhail Tal. All right, and what we're going to be looking at today is his response with the white pieces against the modern defense, or the so-called modern defense. And boy, do I hate the modern defense. So I am happy to be doing this video and sharing this information with you. So the modern defense, and it wasn't called the modern defense always. It used to be called the robots defense after the German player Karl Robots back in the 60s. And it came to be um, known as the modern defense after the some British players in I think it was like the late 80s, early 90s revived it and you know infused it with some new ideas and called it the modern defense. And it's a good defense, all jokes aside, and it's played occasionally by very strong players like Kramnik, um, even Magnus Carlsen from time to time. And I think its best attribute is that you can play it against absolutely anything. So e4, d4, c4, you can play 1g6, knight f3, 1g6, it doesn't matter. If somebody plays the birds, f4, 1g6, g3, 1g6. And so uh, with this, it, allows great flexibility on both sides of the board, and a player that's really skilled in playing the black pieces can you can be in for a long, long day. But you must be ready because white can play all type of attacking schemes. From the aggressive Yugoslav type attacks with f3, d4, c4, and e4, even like four pawns attacks. You must be prepared for the h4, h5. All type of systems from white, from the crazy chaotic systems to the quiet systems where white just simply um, puts two pawns in the center, e4, e5, knight f3, knight c3, plays a4 and stuff like that. So, the games tend to be very rich and strategic, but uh, we're going to look at an aggressive player today, Mikhail Tal, a fan favorite, one of the most aggressive players in history, okay, and former world champion in 1960. So let's get right to it. First game. Okay, this first game took place again. Tal has the white pieces. First game took place in the Latvian Championship in 1954. All right, so Tal was still strong player at the time, but he didn't really reach his stride until about 1957, where Tal became Tal. But here we go, the Latvian Championship in 1954 against a player named Balinch. Okay, so e4, g6, d4. Again, if you're a d4 player, right, you can go from d4, g6, and e4. Bishop g7, knight f3 from Tal, d6, bishop c4, knight f6, knight c3. So we see Tal with the classical approach. We don't see a f3 or f4, just develop the pieces. Castle, queen e2, and black plays c6. And queen e2 has the idea of pushing e5 without having the queens being traded off after d takes e5. Okay. Also, white has to be aware of this tactic. Say after castles, knight takes e4. This is well known, where black pretty much equalizes. The bishop takes d3, d3, d takes e4. All right, Now white still has like a slight advantage, but this is pretty much known as a equalizing system for black. So this is why we see these moves after castles, queen e2. Now it can be played before castling from black, but the bishop takes f7, king takes e7, knight takes e4. The king might be a little misplaced, but I don't see nothing wrong with just castling by hand here. But normally, castles first, and now it's really threatened, so queen e2. Here the balance plays c6, and now e5, d takes e5, d takes e5, knight d5, bishop g5, h6, and now bishop d2, bishop e6, knight e4. Tal avoids the trade of pieces here. He could have castled, for instance, on the queen side. Here, that's an option, and then played, say, h4 or something like that. Now, if he played h4 here, black can get rid of some minor pieces. Alright? And the closer black gets to an endgame, the better. Although white structure isn't too bad off here. But Tal wants to preserve the pieces and plays bishop e6. So knight d7. And we already see the elements of Tal's style in effect, as he is not worried too much about material. We see here the bishop and knight on e5. He simply just backs the bishop up, gives up the pawn, knight takes e5, knight takes e5, bishop takes e5, and he doesn't rush to grab this pawn, right? Bishop takes h6 could be met by bishop b2, rook b1, rook d1 and queen a5 check. And black comes out a bit better in that exchange, after castles and, for example, bishop e5. But instead of pawn grabbing, Tal continues to improve his position, and he continues to attack. He plays knight c5, threatening to double up the pawns on the e file. He's also threatening this b pawn. Bishop takes b2. Now knight takes e6, must be captured. F takes e6, queen takes e6, king h7. So although up in material, we see black's position, especially on the center and king side, has deteriorated greatly. Rook d1, queen f6, rook f6, queen e4. Rook swings over to the d file, castles, and bishop g7. c4 hitting the knight, knight c3, bishop takes c3, bishop takes c3, and bishop c2, right, with pressure here. Queen e8. And now h4. Simple idea to play h5, putting more pressure here. Rook a d8. Simply h5. And now here, black should have played simple rook takes d1, rook takes d1, rook takes d1, just cashing in and trading everything here. Bishop takes d1 and then moving himself out of any pin scenario with king g7. Okay, and after h takes g6, and let's say queen d7, the game would have been pretty equal. Instead, black played the move h5, and after rook d6, queen f3, right, attacking this bishop on c3, bishop d4, and now bishop takes g6. Notice how Tal utilizes the tempi here to move the queen out from in front of the bishop on c2 by attacking the bishop on c3. And now he plays this move, bishop takes g6, and now black is forced to give up the exchange. Rook takes g6, queen e4. Again, he doesn't automatically recapture, but he just utilizes the pin. King g7, and now Tal transfers into a favorable endgame of rook versus bishop. And although black is down a pawn, the material is still in his favor as he has a rook, and in exchange for the bishop, and black does not have enough compensation. And here at the a4, black resigned. Okay, and now we fast forward in our time machine 10 years later. Tal has already won and lost the World Chess Championship. And we are at the Amsterdam Interzonal round 23, 1964. Tal with the white pieces versus Georgy P. Tringov. Again, Tal plays in classical manner. No, Yugoslav attack or setups where, he gets real aggressive like that or anything. He just gets the pieces involved. Sometimes you'll see stuff like this. Even f3. But Tal just gets the pieces going. Knight c3, d6, knight f3, c6, bishop g5. And I love how he plays. He just, real simple. Puts 2 pawns in the center and just starts bringing the pieces out. Right? He doesn't waste time bringing a lot of pawns out. Queen b6. Now take a moment and just reflect here. What's black's idea here? Black obviously is attacking this pawn here and wants white to do something awkward in trying to defend this pawn. For instance, like rook b1, which is totally possible. But these are things you must consider. What does black want white to do here? b3, right? Creating a general malaise and awkwardness in defending. Now think like Tal. What would Tal do in this position? Tal would not defend this pawn, but Tal would create a scenario that he would give this pawn away, but make black lose time, right? And getting it. In other words, there's going to be a price to pay. He's like, I'll give you this pawn, but I'm going to get X amount of tempi in return, right? That's how you have to think in these type of positions, because we know that, falling back on general principles, that the queen should not be out pawn grabbing, right? Now we weigh that with the fact that we know chess is also a concrete game of calculation, that especially with these engines today, that there's positions that you would never thought a pawn could be taken, but it can be taken. But we're only human, and we have to use these general guideposts, to help us think during the game. And if I'm looking at this position, I'm not guarding this pawn. I'm looking at this queen. I'm looking at the fact that he only has a bishop developed. I'm saying, hey, there got to be a way where I can ignore this, continue on with my plan of developing, setting up my center and attacking without being distracted by black's idea. Okay, Tal plays queen d2, exclam. Queen takes b2. Now watch what happens. Rook b1, so he gains a move. Queen has to move again to a3. Bishop c4, that's 2 moves. Alright. Now, queen a5. That's another move. Castle. 3 moves. So 3 moves right by the queen. So let's see what Tal gained for the pawn. He gained a rook move to b1, bishop to c4, right? So got the open lines, right? Open diagonal. Rook came to the b file and castle, all for the price of a pawn. e6 is played. Tal just plays rook fe1. Right, playing in e5. a6. Totally just wasting time. Right, dubious move, but he figures that, hey, the position is closed. What can Tal do? Tal plays bishop f4, attacking his pawn, and Tringov plays real dubious move because the idea here for black is you're behind in development like this. You want to keep this position closed as possible. So you want to play a move like queen c7, like protecting the pawn but keeping things closed, or queen d8. Right? I'm not saying that black is good, but the spirit of it is, hey, you're this far behind in development. You don't want any problems. You don't want any conflict. So you're trying to keep things closed. So by him playing e5, this is exactly what the doctor ordered for Tal. D takes, D takes. Now the D file is open. Queen D6, and then again, that's all you need is that tactical vision. Tal had great tactical vision. So a lot of players might have moved the bishop back here or something like that. Yeah, it's a good move. Black is a-okay here. You play moves like that. Knight g5 next. So I'm not saying that's a bad move, but again, you have to judge the position. White only has, black only has 2 pieces developed. The king is in the middle of the board, so you have to be, looking a little deeper into the position. Can you even guess what Tal played here? Tal played queen d6. I think I showed you the move already, but queen d6. Right, so he's willing to he leaves this knight here and the bishop on prise. So queen takes c3. The rook just simply transfers to d1, threatening a brutal checkmate here. Knight d7. Another piece is sacrificed. Bishop takes f7. King takes f7. Knight g5 check. King e8 and queen e6. And the game is over. It's mate in 3. Okay, knight e7 and queen f7, etc. It's mate in 3, so figure that one out. Alright, 17 moves. Just, and a lot of you have opportunities like this in your game, but you miss them. Because you don't, you see that, and you see, man, if I move the queen, then you're going to lose the knight, and stuff like that. So remember this move, queen d6. Let's move on. Devastating win by Tal. This game is from 1970. This is a Blitz game. Tal versus Borislav Ivkov. And I'll go through it fast, just like a Blitz game. So here he doesn't play knight f3. He plays bishop g5. And so obviously, when the bishop comes out that early like that, and the f pawn is not covered by the knight, usually white is thinking of castling the queen side and using the f pawn to attack. So let's see what happened. h6, bishop e3, b6, and then Tal decides knight f3. Bishop b7, bishop d3, knight d7, queen d2, and now he has an option to castle either way. Castles queen side, knight gf6. Tal plays b3, and c4 is played. Bishop takes e4, knight takes e4. So there's that tactic that I was telling you about earlier. Like a little fork tactic. Bishop takes e4, rook h e1. G takes f3, e6, bishop f4, and we see the um, the open lines in the position, and that's what Tal thrives on. It's attacking this, right? But this is incidental. It's easy enough to protect. What's really important is the open e-file here. So knight f6 happens with the protection of the d6 pawn in mind. Again, we see this scenario, king in the middle, and Tal plays bishop takes f6, f takes, rook takes, and now king f7. Tal takes the other pawn, queen c8. Now he plays e5, rook d8, queen d8, rook g1, and now we're looking at this pawn, queen d7, queen d3, queen f5. Of course, Tal plays queen c4, keeping the attack going, queen e6, queen c7, queen e7, queen c4. Remember, this is a blitz game, queen e6. And here he could have took queen takes d3, excuse me, queen takes e6, king takes e6, followed by, let me just show you instead of saying it, followed by rook takes here. Okay, but he chooses to attack again. Queen e6, and actually he finally did do it. And Tal went on to win. Now I don't know if he won by resignation or on time. I mean, there's still a lot of play here. He has some pawns, but the quality of those pawns is a little suspect there, and it's hard to see. There's definitely no clear win at the king f7 and rook g1. So he might have won on time or something like that. 1972. This is Tal versus player named Valery Zuberstein. This Russian championship, the 40th Russian championship in Bakou. This is where Garry Kasparov is from, in the Soviet Union. Again, e4, g6, d4, c6. c4 is like a funny move in a modern. The idea is to play d5. There's an old line I can't remember right off the top of my head where I think if white tries to play f4, like this Austrian attack, I think that's what it is. Then after d5, I think black equalizes comfortably here. I forgot what this line is called. Like it has a funny name, like Gurgunza, something, Gurgunidze, something like that. But I know that this move c6 is like specifically tailored against the Austrian attack. Although there's other ways for white to get an advantage here. All right. So c6 is played, and here Tal plays c4. So for the first time, you see Tal deviating from his form, his knight c3, knight f3. But at the same time, black is not playing d6. He's playing c6 here. All right. So c4 is played, d5. Okay. And now e5. And now what I want you to know, if you don't know it, is that this is now a Carol-Slav advanced variation. And this is part of the flexibility that occurs in this modern defense, and why you really have to know what you're doing, because it's easy to get steered into something, a certain opening, and you not recognize it until it's too late. And if your opponent doesn't know what's going on, you can steer him into some obscure line. Bishop g7, knight c3. The knight comes out to h6. Now Tal plays h4 immediately, taking advantage of the fact that the knight has put itself there on h6. Right? Under certain circumstances, this pawn would be free to, come to h5 if need be. Bishop e6. And we know Tal well enough by this time that he doesn't care about this pawn. So knight ge2, d takes c4, and the knight goes to f4. All right. He wants to gain time in the position, which he does, because bishop d5. Okay. So now b3. He wants to gain more time, so he gives another pawn. C takes, A takes. All right. So we got more open files. In this case, we had the rook file open on the A file, and we have this A3 to F8 diagonal open. E6, bishop D3, knight F5, bishop takes F5, snatches that right off, E takes F5, and now bishop A3, which makes it difficult for black to castle here. So bishop F8, bishop takes F8, king takes F8, and queen D2. Problem is now that with the absence of the dark square bishop for black, we can see how weak his dark squares are, right? This is going to be problematic because the only piece that can really guard those squares is his queen. So bishop e6, rook d1, and black has to be careful, and especially in these kind of structures, these Carol-Slav structures, of the move d5 just blowing up the position. And we can see here that black does not have adequate control of d5, and that he probably should have kept his bishop, kept that bishop there. So after queen e7, rook h3 again, Tal just leaves this pawn on breeze. Knight a6. Black has the right idea and trying to develop, of course. Now d5. C takes d5, knight fd5, bishop takes, knight takes. Again, getting more time. Queen takes, e5 check. Rook e3, queen d6, queen c3. And notice the initiative that black develops, that white develops, and it's just the fact that black just gives white so much time that he just overwhelms him with these moves. F6 is played, and then knight c7, and Tal just crushes him. And again, like I say in the other videos, I'm not just showing wins by Tal or short games. I'm just showing the game. So if it ends in a draw, it ends in a draw. If he loses, he loses. But this is just how he was, demolishing, the modern defense back in the days. Okay. Next one, Edward Gufeld. Again, this is Russian Championship. And this is in Moscow, 1972. Back to normal, right? D6, bishop c4, knight f6, queen e2. And again, notice Tal leaves this knight back here. So usually, again, when this happens, maybe this knight's coming here, or he plans on fortifying the center with c3. Okay. Plus, you must think with this early c6, at some point maybe b5, b4 is coming, and he didn't want the knight to be here. All little subtleties in the position. So bishop b3 gets the bishop out of the way of any kind of oncoming pawn storm over there, castles, and he castles on the king side also. Queen c7, e5, d takes e5, and knight d5. Again, with the knight not being here, this also gives white the option of playing c4. Rook e1, strengthening the center, knight a6, and now Tal doesn't want to lose his bishop at the knight c5, so he simply plays c3. So after knight c5, he keeps the piece on the board. b6, and now Tal plays the move a3. And the idea behind a3 is so that he can play c4, because in the air, in the position is moves like bishop a6, right? Being very annoying. If he plays c4 at this moment, well, knight b4 comes harassing the bishop, and he just, plays c3 to preserve the bishop here. So he continues with this idea. Now on a3, he can play c4. The bishop does not have, the knight on d5 does not have this square any longer. So c4 attacks this guy, but also serves as a block to bishop a6. So there you have it. So a5, c6. Okay, a5 on black's part prevents b5. B4. Bishop a6, knight bd2, and black is a strong grandmaster also, and he's playing very well in this position. Knight f4, queen e3, and so this move is served to improve both sides actually. Knight e4 has caused the queen to move out of the pin from this bishop over here, and also improve the position of this knight on e6. Now Tal can play b4, which he does. Drives the knight back. And now he plays h4. h5. Bishop b2. Bishop b7. Knight g5. This gets rid of a possible defender on the king side and brings a piece closer to the attack for white. Okay, Gufel trades some pieces off, and he has to be careful because white wants to play e6. So black plays e6. Knight e4. Of course, with every pawn move, there's a weakness left behind. In this case, d6 square and f6 square is a little bit weaker today. Again, Tal is not concerned too much about material, and Gufeld is. So here is a little trap that he falls into after bishop takes e5, bishop takes e5, queen takes e5. Now, queen takes, knight takes, and knight d6. And now we see this knight is attacked, and the bishop, rook d8, knight takes, rook d2, rook takes, and black loses a piece just like that. Alright, strong grandmaster. Now the knight is entrenched on d6, and like they say, the rest is just a matter of technique. Creates a pass pawn opportunity, and that's it. And Tal makes that one look simple. Okay, here's one of Yasser Seirawan's idols growing up, the Canadian Grandmaster Duncan Suttles, who specialized in playing this defense. Well, he played Tal in Sukhumi, 1972. Game started off classically motivated. Tal plays c6 and bishop b3. Again, notice how he delays placing that queenside knight. Knight f6, attacking the e4 pawn. Notice that since Tal didn't commit his knight, this leaves this pawn a little vulnerable. So he's kind of forcing him to decide, hey, what are you going to do? Knight c3, you're going to play knight e2, queen e2, you got to do something. Tal plays knight bd2, castle, castle, bishop g4. Now Tal pushes e5, d takes e5, knight d5. h3. Okay, so it gets black to relinquish the bishop here. And this is like a nominal advantage for white. White has more space and the two bishops. There's e6. Again, at the e6, you have to worry about this square, d6. So right now it's not that important, but it's something down the road. Again, c4 is possible. There, queen e2, queen c7, rook e1, making sure that pawn on e5 is protected. Knight d7, and there it is, c4. Okay, now that knight has to get out of dodge. Bishop g5, rook f e8, rook a d1, and we can see that black is just passive in this position, right? He's not under immense danger, but he doesn't really have any counterplay here. a5, bishop a4, knight c5, bishop c2, rook a d8, a3, rook takes, knight d7, try to pressure the e pawn, bishop drops back to f4, knight b6, bishop d2, right? This a pawn is just hanging, rook a8, bishop c3, and now c5, bishop e4 from Tal, knight a4, bishop e1. Again, we see the constant attack against the e pawn, and here Tal cannot defend it any further, so he just gives up the bishop. Bishop takes c6, queen takes c6, and now he finds a nice tactic here. Bishop takes a5, rook takes a5 due to the weakness on the back rank. Rook d8 check, bishop f8, and queen d8. Excuse me, queen d2, and now there's attack on the rook here. The idea is just to play here. Queen c7, good move by Suttles. He protects the rook, and the queen can't afford to leave because his own rook would be unprotected. So rook e8, king g7, so he stops this idea. So queen g5. Now the idea, of course, is to get in there. Queen f6. Rook a7. Check. King g8. Knight g5. Queen d7. Rook d8. Just fantastic moves by Tal, man. He put so much pressure on the opponent. It's unbelievable. b6. And that's all she wrote. You might be saying, well, why didn't he just move the queen? Right? Well, first of all, queen, let's eliminate this move. Queen e7. Okay, because the bishop on f8 is pinned. So let's go here. Okay, so after queen c7, of course you can pause the game, set it up, and all that stuff. But after a move like queen c7, it just rook takes f8 wins. Okay? Bang. Right? All breaks down to simple tactics, forks and skewers, and they're just hidden. You just gotta uncover the layers. That's all that's going on here. This is why Suttles gave up his queen. And after a few moves, he was forced to resign as there's an attack against the rook and attack against f7. What do we call that? A double attack. Right? So when you see the final result, you say, wow, that's simple. But it's being able to see, through a couple of layers that these attacks are there. That's what makes these guys great. You can see, they see a little bit more than we do. Okay, so that was another great attack from Tal. And again, like I said, he's just brutalizing this defense. Again, another strong master, grandmaster. I think you pronounce the name Sabo. It's spelled. The last name is spelled Szabo. Laszlo Sabo. And this game is from Sochi, 1973. Here, Tal gets aggressive and plays this Austrian attack. Again, a6. And this is the idea behind this is to, continue aggressively with b5, anticipating white's castling, queen side, etc. Right? Knight f3, b5, bishop d3, bishop b7, queen e2, c5. D takes c5 is pretty much forced because c4. And now e5. Why e5? Again, c4 is on the card, so to save this bishop, black would have to move, queen d2 or something like that. So the best move here is e5. Knight c6, bishop e3, knight d4, knight takes d4, c takes d4, and castle. Okay, and now we see white, getting black into a little bit of hot water because now he can't really take the piece. Okay, because of the condition of the queen. So he plays b4. b4, to me, proves to be a weak move because it just sends the knight to where it wants to go anyway. Knight h6, desperately trying to develop. Of course, if, d takes e3, then just bishop b5. b5 wins. Okay. So knight h6. Of course, he can afford to take the castle. And basically, this refutes black's whole opening strategy. Bishop c5. Tal just takes. Rook fe8. He's not even worried about the pawn being captured on a2. Because, again, this gains time for white. All of this pawn grabbing and stuff. And white is just way ahead. I mean, it looks good, but there's no concrete way that black can really, checkmate white here. Right? See, Tal is still sacrificing pieces, even with the king on d2 on that open file. Incredible. Queen e6. Queen c4. And again, these are just the last couple of moves before black has to resign. Queen e6. This is from 1973, from Tallinn. And this player's name is Connor. Never heard of this guy. I don't think it's the Chess Olympia, I'm not sure. But anyway, Tal develops again in classical form. Gets this e5 in. I mean, he liked these setups with this pawn on e5. Again, watching, that the bishop doesn't get snatched off. This time he plays h3 before he had played c3. I'm sorry, he plays a3 before he had to play c3. So this bishop goes to a2 as opposed to being on c2 where it's, kind of hitting on granite. It stays on this powerful diagonal, and then c4 is still an option here. Queen e2. Knight to e4. Queen takes. For bishop f5. Again, he's not even concerned about this pawn here. c5. Bishop h6. Bishop takes c2. Rook a c1. Again, gaining time. Rook e d1. Gaining more time. Bishop takes c4. Bishop takes c4. Bishop takes d7. King takes d7. Queen c4. Gaining more time because now the knight is attacked. Knight b6. Queen c3. Notice how white doesn't really get the time back because black doesn't really get the time back because of these type of threats. Rook takes, rook takes, rook e1. And now e6. There it is, h4. Notice that the center gets fixed and then Tal starts attacking on the king side. Knight g5. Rook e4. So king h2. This nice build up of the attack by Tal. And after these moves, white resigned. What are you going to do about rook takes f7 after all? Okay, now, fast forward in the time machine. 1977. Here's Tal against Guillermo Garcia Gonzalez. Same setup from Tal, or similar setup. This time he's playing a4 here. Right? Notice how he stopped putting the knight on c3 a long time ago. Knight goes e2 and f3, and he puts a grip on e5. So this time he doesn't put the pawn on e5, but he puts a piece on e5. c4. Gets rid of a defender from the king side. And notice how Tal skillfully using the e5 as a jump off point. Usually when you have an outpost, you use it to transfer different pieces. It's like a train station. So you got the knight using it, then the bishop, rook, queen, whatever. Just good play by Tal, just how he just came in there and exploited the cramped nature of the position. Okay, this is the problem that black has in these openings is the lack of space. Lack of space gets you in trouble after a while. Pieces get uncoordinated, and then you wind up just losing them. You know, look, pieces are. So knight d7, bishop takes d7, rook f3, knight b6, bishop c7, knight takes c4. Again, not even concerned about the pawn being lost, but instead wants to gain time. Queen c8 check, king f8, bishop g6, just leaving the bishop on c8 on prise, bishop e8, rook takes e6, leaving the bishop on c8, or c7 on prise, rook takes c7, he's like, go ahead, take it, rook takes e8, king e8, queen g8, bishop f8, bishop takes f7 check, and black resign. So, man, just killing him. I can't believe what I'm looking at. I've seen these games, you know, and I'm still just like amazed. This is Tal versus Zlatko Cleric, Sochi 1977. Now here we see this type of This is like the way a lot of players that play, say, D4 openings, they'll like to play like this and try to get into a position similar to King's Indian. And here's a switch, right? Tal trades queens immediately, but don't be fooled. Is he still attacking, even with the queens off the board? Okay, and here he just has the two bishops. He has a small advantage here. Karpov would be happy. Here, Tal even gives up the exchange in this ending. And now this is going to give Tal an advantage here. He has this three pawns to two majority on the queen side. Plays f4. And the game gets a little sharp. And next thing you know, he has some pawns running wild here. Rook g8, h4, king d6. Now he decides it's time. And once he regained the exchange, that's a wrap. That rook is tied up behind the pawn. And what are you gonna do? Too slow. And after that, Black resigned. 1977 again, round 10. It's a player that he played before named Connor. Here's the Austrian attack. Again, allowing the trade of queens. And here Black should be able to equalize, but Tal gradually outplays his opponents. And what's interesting to me is that in the more aggressive continuations, like the Austrian attacks and things like that, you would expect Tal to be, what's the word to use, like more impressive in his attacks. But it's actually the quote unquote aggressive continuations that Tal is actually winning in the end game and be in defeating his opponents. And here's another one. He resigned at the rook c2. It's the simple continuations with the two pawn centers, right? Where you see in the bishop coming to c4, where you see Tal, with the most devastation. Same tournament, Talon, round 15, and Tal is playing a player named Vadaz. Here's a switch. Tal plays c3, which you see from time to time, and it's just continuation that allows his bishop to bite on granite here. And usually the intention is to just basically play e5 and storm the king side of the opponent. Okay, so we see the basic setup right here. Again, um, white has this nice pawn chain that Black has to work hard to tear down, and while Black is using time to break down this chain, White is going to be using that time to attack on these open files and attack on the king side. Okay, so we can see the battle at hand. This move again, I just explained to you what White is trying to do and why he set up this center in the first place. Now, that's why this move from Black is anti-positional. Knight takes c3, and this strengthens the center. It helps prolong Black's task of tearing down the center. Right? It's like he tore it down and then helped him rebuild it. So bishop d5 and e6. Knight takes b3. Check. Knight takes f7. And here, knight h6. Rook b1. Knight c7. Knight takes c1. Knight f7. And we see black has a bit of compensation here. Queen takes c1. And black is actually better in this position here. Okay, so Tal miscalculated here. Queen c7, queen e3, h4, queen d6, and we see those two bishops, and we see the execution of black's plan being triumphant on the queen side. So he shuts down the white king side attack, and now he starts pushing on the queen side triumphantly. And after that, Tal was forced to resign. So that in all those games, that was the first loss that we seen from Tal here. And it started with this move e6, which was a little too aggressive. Okay. Perhaps something more tame like bishop takes d5 and then queen f3. Knight c4. And then rook b1 attacking this pawn. You know, throw that in there. Could have been more what was needed in the position. Alright, so moving on. The Hugovens, Vikanze 1982. And with the black pieces is one of the favorites, you know, when it comes to commentary, is GM Larry Christensen, who is also an aggressive player. So we see Tal with this setup. Again, a lot of King's Indian players will like this type of setup. Or, I'm sorry, D4 players. Castle, B6. Bishop F3. Rook B8, Queen D2. Bishop B7. Rook E1. So now Tal is fully developed in 15 moves and ready to rock. So H6, Knight H3. And now the idea is, you know, how exactly to break through White's position here. So Knight C5. Tal goes for the old standby, E5. Knight Fe4, Knight takes, and Queen C2. D5. Tal opts for bishop takes E4, gives the bishop up, and then Knight F2. Queen F7. Knight takes E4, so he just goes up a pawn here. Queen F5. There's a pin, so the bishop has to drop back. Rook BD8. Bishop has to move again because of the threat of rook takes bishop. Rook F7. And now Queen E2, getting out of the pin from the queen, and now the knight is free to move. So bishop takes, queen takes, and now bishop F8. Rook F3. Now I think Karpov would have played queen takes F5 there. Bishop C5 check. King F1. And finally trades the queens off. Check. And now White is trying to contest the D file because Black is simply down a pawn here, and his only compensation, if he does have any, is just his activity. So he's trying to stay active as possible by contesting the D file. A3, with the idea of playing B4. Christensen shuts that idea down by playing a4, rook f1, c6, and now the idea is to play the rook f to f3 and then play d3. Okay, some little tactics here. Bishop c5. So now rook c1. And now Tal comes with another idea to play rook c2 and then rook d2. Because that's the major problem, is how to address the issue on the d file. So h5, rook c2, and rook g8. This helps Tal immensely because he just basically gave up, the blockade that he had going on the d file, but it's hard to find other moves because rook d2 was coming. There it is. And now we can say that black is just a pawn down here. And of course, black wants to try to keep the pieces on the board. And here he trades off to his own detriment. And the problem is that he was worried about this breakthrough happening on the queen side. And the problem is that he's in Zugzwang now. So if king a6, then king b4. So he does that. Bishop b takes a3, king a4, and then king d3. All right. So there's a nice ending by Tal. So for instance, if king takes a3, then king e3, and the idea is you can just simply execute a breakthrough. Here, I just show you. Execute a breakthrough on the king side. So after king b4, g4. No matter which way you take, let's say f takes, then just f5, e6. And the same thing will happen on the other side. If he took with this pawn, then that's how that would go now. Okay, so Larry Christensen goes down 1982. 1985, Karsten Hoy has the black pieces. Tal plays the system with c3 again. Okay, so knight a3. g5, and Tal goes for it here. Gives up the piece for 2 pawns. f4, f5, e6. Bishop takes e6. And man, this guy just keeps attacking. Bishop takes d7, king takes g7, h takes d4, rook h8, rook takes f4, queen takes f4, rook h6, knight e5, d takes e5, f takes e5, queen g3. Very strong move, knight e3, king f8 to avoid these forks, rook f1. g3. Great move by Tal here. And now he's going to have the advantage of the 2 minor pieces versus the rook. And what's interesting, it's very hard for the rook to move. And that was all she wrote. For example, if, I don't know, let's say rook f1 right there, then simply king h4. And, just to support this pawn. There's no way to stop that pawn. Here's another game from Tal. This time he plays knight c3. And A lot of times play a castle queen side there. But here we see with this early b5, he opts the castle on the other side. And after a few moves, Black was actually able to draw this game. Okay. Now after f6, and again, like people say, all Tal's attacks weren't always sound. Dangerous, but not always sound. This is one of them. The f6. Tal played knight takes g6. If the f takes d5, rook takes f8, queen takes f8. He's in all type of trouble. He plays queen e4, right? Because he can't afford to trade queens here. He plays queen e4, queen f6, rook f2, and here the player Jens Christensen plays queen takes d4, allowing the queen to come to e6. Where if he plays queen d6, he keeps the queen off of this square, right? Instead, he played queen d4, going after the pawn, but now after queen e6, he gives Tal a way out. That game ended in a draw, even though Tal was close to losing there. It's another game from 1990, so we're near the end of Tal's life, man. He's still going strong, right? 1990. Stefan Moore. The first game I showed you was from 1954, so this is 1990. Okay? That's a lot of years, man. Here we go with this Austrian attack. And I think here I would have played queen takes d2 if I'm playing Tal. I'm trading queens. The guy, showed guts. He played queen a5. C takes. He might have thought since Tal was old that he couldn't attack as well anymore or something. But he was wrong about that. Queen f2. Tal immediately, switches, the queen over to start action over there on the king side. Knight g5. Right, watch, see this, just seeing these tactics, man. Knight takes b5. Then he does an intermediate move, rook takes b5. Here, because knight takes d7 would be an instant disaster. So, bishop c6, rook takes f7, knight takes c3, rook takes f6. He's just taking everything. Knight takes e4, knight takes, bishop takes. He does queen e2 here. Right, he just doesn't want to give it time. Rook d6 is the correct move. Right, and white is better. But he does queen e2. Bishop takes g2, and now rook a6. Attacking the queen. The idea here is if bishop takes f6, of course queen takes f4, and he probably should have opted for that. Instead, he plays bishop takes g2, and then now he's not going to get anything. Rook d1, queen b7, check, king h8, rook e6, rook c8. Of course, Tal's seen this already. Rook e7, rook takes c4, and the rook takes queen? Of course not. Rook d8. And that'll be checkmate in 2 moves. A fantastic game by Tal, who's again getting up there. And that was our last game. So Tal had an impressive record. I think I don't know how many games I showed you. I know it was a lot of games, but if I just had to guess right off the top of my head without looking, Tal probably. Matter of fact, I gotta look. I gotta look real quick. Hold on. Yeah, I know it was a lot of games. Tal won 14 out of 16 games. So 14 wins, one loss, and one drawn game. And that's going from 1954, right? The first game that I showed you, to the Bundesliga in 1999 versus the German player Stefan Moore. So that's a lot of years covered in the modern defense. And like I said, I pretty much, like I said, hit and so again, Tal's record against the modern is very impressive. And as you saw, a lot of those games were devastating wins too. It wasn't like he had a couple of long end games, but devastating devastating games in some of these classical systems. These were where I was most impressed when he was just playing like these type of games like this, where he would get that pawn on e5. Later on, you saw him playing the like the Austrian attacks and things like that. But these games when he was younger, when he was just playing these two pawn centers and playing this manner, um, very powerful chess. So if you're looking for an antidote for the modern, that is your Tal is your man. I'm gonna look at some other players to see how they stood up against it, but I don't know if you're gonna find players, with that kind of record, against the modern defense. So hope you enjoyed that. Comments and suggestions are welcome, and please like and subscribe to the channel. I'll talk to you later.